Hello my sweet friends and welcome to Kinda Shabby. My name is Becky and I am so glad you stopped by. Recently I shared a video featuring DIY projects using drop cloth that you gals seem to really enjoy. So today I have 3 more drop cloth projects for us and the last one is hot glue friendly. Well, there is lots of fun in store today, so let's get these projects started. For our first project, we are going to be making some cute little coasters, and we're actually going to be stitching 2 pieces together, but I'm only going to be stamping the front. And I have cut my pieces 5 by 5 inches, and we're going to be using some elements from the absolutely lovely Pastiche stamp collection. And I'm also using the Fabric Creations fabric ink in the color Metallic Pure Gold. I've placed some on my palette and I'm just going to run my brayer across this to get a nice thin layer. Run this over my stamp, and I am going to apply a little more ink than I would normally use for paper because your fabric is going to soak a lot of that up. Wipe that excess off with my finger. And I'm going to be placing my image just a little lower to allow room for my stitching. And then I'm going to walk my fingers all over that image to make sure I get a good imprint to my fabric below. Isn't that pretty? I love this color. And so I'm going to do the same thing and stamp out 3 more in some different images from the Pastiche collection, and then we'll start our stitching. So after stamping my images, I thought they looked just a little bit plain, so I want to add some interest to the background. And your stamps come with a corresponding mask that you can place over the top, and then you can stamp around it, and that's going to protect this image. And then I'm going to use the Kindest Regards stamp to add a little bit of interest to our background. So using more of that same gold ink, come over the top with my other stamp. I'm just going to lightly run over that. I'm not really going to press down very hard. And look how nice that turns out. So I'm going to do that same thing with our Kindest Regards stamp and go over each of these images as well. But I just think that is gorgeous. So for these 2, I loaded fresh ink up onto that Kindest Regards stamp, but I didn't re-ink that when I stamped these 2. So you can see the script is much lighter in the background. So you can decide if you want just a barely subtle hint of some script, or if you want that to be a bolder look. Whatever is your personal preference is going to be just perfect for you. And while we're waiting on all of this to dry, I'm going to go and get everything cleaned up so this does not dry on all of my craft items here. And now I'm going to take the backer piece and lay that on top of the stamped image and clip that into place, leaving an open space at the bottom for us to be able to turn this right side out. And you could also use straight pins if you don't have the clips. And now with everything clipped into place, I'll be heading to my sewing machine and stitching a 3/8 inch seam allowance on all 4 sides, but again leaving a small part open at the bottom for turning. Before turning this out through our opening, I'm going to take my scissors and clip the corner very close to that stitching, but not through the stitching. And I'm going to trim down the seams on 3 sides, but where our opening is, I'm going to leave that seam long just like that. And now we're going to turn this right side out. And this is a stick that comes inside my polyfill, but you want to have something with a blunt end that you can use to poke out those corners. That is not going to be an absolutely crisp corner like it would be if you were using, say, a thinner cotton material. And then we're going to tuck in those seams. And I'm going to take a second to just give this all a good press. And I'm going to press both sides and really focus on those seams as well. And now I'm going to go back to my machine and stitch a 1/8 inch allowance all the way around, and that's going to do two things. It's going to close up our opening, and it's going to help these edges lie flat, as you can see I've done with this one. And after stitching, we're going to give it one more good press to make sure everything lies nice and flat. And here are all our super cute little coasters. How quick and easy and fun was that? I think these are absolutely adorable. And I love that these are such a nice soft color, just perfect for fall. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our next project. When I made this pillow in my last drop cloth video, I had a few viewers ask me how to clean this. And because I pulled out strings to make fringe and we stuffed it with polyfill and stitched it closed, this is not going to be something that's going to be able to be put in the washing machine. So this week we're going to be making an envelope back pillow cover where you can insert your own pillow form, and that way can actually be washed in the washing machine in cool water on a gentle cycle. And I am using an 18 by 18 inch pillow form. The front of my cover is 20 by 20, and I am using elements from the Queen Bee stamp collection, and I have already placed those elements onto my gridded thin mount, and I've also placed measurements onto the pillow cover so that way when I go to stamp this, it's going to be in the middle. And I've marked it so it's in the middle this way, but I actually like to sit my design up about an inch higher. That way the entire design is visible and I'm not going to lose this when I actually set the pillow up on the sofa. Again, we're using our fabric ink, and we're going to get a nice thin coat on our brayer. Run this over our design. Wipe off some of that excess that I have here. I'm going to line up this dot and this dot and just walk my fingers over every bit of this design to get a good impression onto our fabric below. Isn't that just gorgeous? My goodness, I love it. And again, we're going to go clean everything off while we let this dry. I used a water-soluble marker to make those marks on the front of my cover, and then I just used a damp rag to remove those marks. And now we're going to take care of the back, which is going to form our envelope. The smaller piece is 20 inches wide and 9 inches high. This piece is 20 inches wide and 18 inches high. And I'm going to turn up a 1-inch section and iron that down. I'm going to take this edge and tuck it up underneath there so it meets that crease and get that ironed down. And I'm going to stitch that down very close to this edge here. And I'm going to do that same thing to this edge on the other side of our backer as well. And that is how that looks after we get that stitching in there. And I only stitched one edge on each of these pieces here. And now we're going to need some ruffles. And I have snipped and ripped a 2.5 inch wide strip, and it is 40 inches long. So I'm going to go to my machine and stitch a gathering stitch right down the middle of this piece. And after stitching, I tied off one end. Now I'm going to come to the other end and just gently pull on that upper thread, and it starts to form a little gather. And I'm going to just work those gathers all the way down to the end of my strip. And after gathering up my ruffle, I pinned it in place, letting that overhang at the bottom, so that way it's going to look really nice on the back. So now I'm going to go to my machine and I'm going to stitch right down my original gathering stitches here to secure that into place. And that looks perfect right there. Going to be so super cute. And now I want another ruffle to frame what we have stamped here. So we're going to snip and rip a strip that is 4.5 inches wide. And I'm going to have to piece this together because I'm going to need it to be 160 inches long. I removed the excess string and then lightly pressed my strips. And then I stitched them together to have a nice long length for a beautiful ruffle. And once again, I did a gathering stitch, but this time I did 2 lines of stitching because that offers a little more stability for our ruffle since it is quite large. And my top line of stitching is 1 inch from the edge, and my second line of stitching is 3/4 of an inch from the edge. And I tied off one end. And again, we are just going to hold on to our top threads and work that all the way down our strip here to create our gorgeous ruffle. So after gathering that strip, I then pinned it into place, and I measured 4 inches from between the 2 stitch lines to the edge of the fabric here, and I rounded off those edges there, again just forming a beautiful little frame around our stamped image. Stitching between the 2 gathering stitches, coming around, and then where this ends, I will just roll this over, lay that down, and stitch over the top there as well. And with that luscious little ruffle all stitched into place, now we're going to put our pillow together. I am going to be doing French seams. This fabric just frays quite a bit, and I just want to make sure that we're going to keep those edges from fraying with subsequent washings. Now, to do French seams, you actually start with your right sides out. I am going to lay this face down though for just a minute, and I'm taking my bottom piece with the short side, match my corners and edges, and pin that into place. And this with our little ruffle here, that's where we're actually going to be able to insert our pillow form. Lining up the edges and pinning that into place as well. We've got all of those edges pinned together, but before I take this to the machine, I'm going to pin this out of the way so I don't catch any of my ruffle into that seam allowance. And now that my ruffle is out of the way, I'm going to flip this back over, and I'm going to stitch a 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way around all 4 sides. And with all 4 sides stitched, we are going to clip the corners, clipping close to the stitching but making sure we don't clip through it. And then we are going to trim down these seams. and leave about half of that seam allowance there. And I'm going to clip the remaining corners and trim all of the seams just as I've shown here. And keeping our ruffle pinned up out of the way, we're going to very carefully turn this inside out. And I'm going to use my marking pen to poke out all of the corners. Then I'm going to take my pressing ham and insert that. And I am taking that seam and pressing the excess to the back of the pillow and then ironing the rest of that down. And you can see how good that looks after you press it. So I'm going to do that same thing and press out all of my seams, putting the seam allowance toward the back of the pillow. And now I'm going to make everything lie nice and flat and give it one more press. And with all of my seams nice and flat, I'm going back to the sewing machine, and this time I'm going to be stitching a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that is going to catch those raw edges in. And we've once again stitched those edges down, and now we're going to turn it right side out and again give all of these seams a good press. So everything is stitched and steamed, and now we just need to put our pillow insert in there. And I love the little ruffle at the bottom there to just kind of make that a finished edge. How absolutely adorable did this pillow turn out? I just love it. So beautiful and very French country, I think. And now for our hot glue friendly project, I am going to be using the Iron Orchid Designs crockery stamp and the Fabric Creations fabric ink in the color Ganache. And this is just a gorgeous dark brown. So beautiful for fall. Once again, I'm applying a little bit of that fabric ink to my palette, running my brayer over there to thin it out and get a nice even layer on my brayer, running that lightly over the top of my chosen stamp, placing it down, and then running my fingers over every inch of that design to make sure I get a good ink transfer to my fabric below. Look how pretty that is. So we're going to set this aside to let this dry, and then we're going to work on the next part of our project. So you're going to need either a jar, I'm using a mason jar, or you can use a tin can, just something that you can put florals inside. I'm going to be making a pouch for my wide mouth mason jar, and it is 7.5 inches wide and 16 inches long. And I have marked down each side 1 inch from each edge, and that's going to be my glue line. I'm going to fold it in half and make a finger crease. So I'm going to just quickly run a bead of glue down each one of those lines that I've drawn. And glue that down. I'm going to run my finger along there just to make sure I haven't missed any on those edges. Give this a test fit. I want to roll these edges back. I'm going to pull this out just a little bit, just so I can get that rolled down. And now I'm going to come on each of these edges and pull out all these individual fibers to fray the edges up to that glue line. So I frayed those edges, and I also tied on a little bow of snipped and ripped cotton muslin fabric. And now I'm going to cut around the outside of my little stamped image here. Just like that. And I'm going to just fray up these edges. Just run my fingernail over that and make those edges nice and shabby as well. And with all of those edges all nice and tattered, I'm going to lay it on here, center it up, and run some hot glue just along the edges here and a little in the middle, and glue that into place. And look how cute that is. That is really going to be so nice and rustic for fall with some florals in there. So now all I need to do is give you a closer look at how cute all of this week's projects turned out. Thank you so much for joining me today. It has been my pleasure to craft with you. Please subscribe for more kinda shabby, but always chic, crafty inspirations. And until next time, my sweet friends, be blessed.